was one of the most competitive deciders we've seen in many, many years. And you can debate whether it was elite, whether it was electric, but you can't debate how tenacious both those sides were. Hoops, was that one of the most brutal ones we've seen for a while?
Oh, look, it was compelling, it was enthralling, it was an epic. From a defensive point of view, the Panthers were the best defensive side all season, and they showed exactly why last night. And to their credit, their halfback just submitted a performance for the ages. There weren't question marks around Nathan Cleary's ability, but for him to deliver like that on the big stage with a busted shoulder, essentially playing with only one arm, hell of a performance.
It's an incredible story for Nathan Cleary, given that we know how drastic that injury is. He's booked for surgery and could miss, 4 to 6 months with recovery. We'll get into Nathan's performance, but just offensively, Buzz, the Panthers had that urgency of a team that did not want to miss out again on grand final day.
No, they didn't, and they dominated possession too on the back of Cleary's kicking games and all the line dropout restarts he earned, and they got a couple of handy 6 against. 12-10, great scoreline. It was up there with the most brutal we've seen. You can put that down to the new rules. We might have had a lot of blowouts mid-year, and they seemed like 2 years ago. The quality of football, the intensity, the power, the strength of finals footy has been unreal with these new rules. So when you've got good teams, there's greater fatigue. There was enormous fatigue out there last night, but great sides can cope with it.
You've changed your view then, because you were carving up the new rules halfway through the year, the blowouts.
No, I don't retract my blowouts because my comments from early in there, because the blowouts were around because this competition was so lopsided, and that's what opened up these big scorelines. I'm saying what we got the last month was what it should be about.
That decider had a supreme tone. That was what... That if we could have that game, and obviously not all the teams are at that standard, but just the way that unfolded was so entertaining.
It was the aggression and the speed of the defensive line, how hard they were hitting, and the fact that they continued that for much of the game. The Penrith's defence was magnificent. Their aggression off the line, their aggression in the tackle, they maintained it the whole game. The way they started, I thought, wow, they certainly signified their intent. And often you see that, and the sting goes out of the game. But Penrith maintained it. Look, South were very brave too. Look,
South's defence was as good as Penrith because Penrith had more territory. Penrith were in the red zone a lot more than South.
And Panthers missed 46 tackles. That's twice as many as Souths did. But as you mentioned, it was their intent. And where they had them on the field.
Look, the game was won, I think, by the back three. Okay, the difference in the back three. Penrith were getting the ball and were getting out of the yardage, and then they were getting in good field position, getting a good kick away, and they really made South have to work to come out of yardage, and South simply couldn't. And we heard Cooper Croc on the show last week say, get on the back three and don't give Cody Walker the opportunity to play the ball play in the Penrith half. And they didn't. That's exactly what they did. They were magnificent the way they did that, and they just got on top of South, and South just, Wayne Bennett said after the game, they just couldn't play with any territory. They were always constantly coming off their own try line. That was the game, and the discipline for Penrith to stay in that, and for Nathan to just keep nailing the ball down into the corner and making South have to work out again. It was a lesson in how to be a halfback.
His kicking game was 11 out of 10. Whether you want to talk about the aerial raids and the fact that they clearly identified Blake Taff and also Jackson Paulo as being potential weak links. They played them a month earlier. They had a similar blueprint then. We all saw the blow-up in the lead-up to that game. And Wayne won the battle that night. But the Panthers won the war last night. They walk away with the Proven Summons trophy. And Nathan, whether it was those aerial torpedo floating bombs or his short kicking game, as Buzz pointed out, they had 5 forced dropouts. South couldn't manage one.
Which was the story.
What we've seen from Cleary the last couple of years, with Penrith making 2 grand finals, I sat there wondering last night, what are we going to be saying about this fella in 5 years? And I don't want to call him an immortal yet, but that game last night, I wrote Kenty, that game and the halfback and the control and the way he managed the game remind me of Thurston. Reminded me of Stewart, of Langer, of Sterling and all the great halves. It did.
You go through all those halfbacks you just mentioned, Buzz, and they all played rep football before they're 25. They're all winning premierships before they're 25. That's just what they. And Nathan's now in that class. All he's got to do now is maintain it for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And he goes down as one of the all-time greats.
Well, he's definitely on his way to becoming one of those greats. And those greats always end up with a trophy. Cooper Cronk mentioned it yesterday. Even though Souths knew he was busted, they couldn't move up on him. They failed to really shut anything down. Like his stats weren't great. No try assists, no line breaks, 14 tackles, 9 missed, but it was the kicking game that was so elite.
He won the game from.
And Cooper said that he can't explain how hard it is when you're carrying an injury to that degree, the physical toll it takes on you mentally as well. But for him to execute a kicking game like that, probably the greatest we've ever seen in a grand final, Cooper was blown away. And that takes one to know one. Cooper's been there. He's done all of that.
Was brave as South Sydney were defensively, particularly with their scrambling and whatnot. One area where they erred, Von, they didn't put enough. They couldn't get to Nathan to pressure his kicking game. He seemed to have an eternity. And to your point, it was one of the best all-round kicking performances that we have seen in a grand final. And the other frightening thing with Nathan is he's 23. He only turns 24 in November.
Imagine him late 20s. He could, could be anything. You pick an Australian team tonight. If the World Cup was still on, he's the halfback.
Oh, has to be.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Well, it's a big thing to sack someone like Cherry Evans, who's been there and done it for so long.
Not after an Origin series and a
Well, that's what I mean.
There's
no incumbent. So there hasn't been an Australian game for
2019. Yeah.